I'm joined today by Piers Morgan, the journalist, interviewer, TV presenter and talent show judge. From being the youngest Fleet Street editor for half a century when he took the reins at the News of the World, still in his 20s, to being sacked from the Mirror after publishing fake photographs of British troops abusing Iraqi prisoners during the war, Piers has reinvented himself in the United States as a talk show host and a winner of the celebrity version of The Apprentice, starting a 10-year friendship with a certain Donald Trump. His celebrity feuds are legendary, as is his devil-may-care attitude to popularity. This week, tweeting a picture of his Good Morning Britain colleagues and crew flipping him the bird after he signed on for another 2 years on the programme. Piers, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Punchy, outspoken, combative, belligerent.
Enough of you.
Well, isn't it tiring being you sometimes?
It can be quite exhausting, yeah, but I like it. I like the rough and tumble. You know, I think when I ran the Mirror for nearly 10 years, and when you've edited a daily paper, I think you just get used to every day being a battle. And the sort of weird thing about newspapers is you've got to fill your 50, 60 pages, and then every day you start all over again. And the only way to really do that with enough energy and drive and dynamism is to just come in the morning feeling absolutely enraged or excited about everything, and then see how the chips fall. So I had that instilled in me. And what Good Morning Britain gives me is a similar kind of dynamic, to come in and just basically have an opinion about absolutely everything.
Paid to rant.
Basically, yes.
Yeah, I don't know how you get the energy for it. I mean, is it just pure caffeine? Is it?
A lot of caffeine. A lot of caffeine. Sleep is really important on a morning show. When you have to get up at 4:45, if you don't get to sleep for enough hours, it can be a very long 2.5 hours on air. But I think it's I genuinely like to be part of the popular zeitgeist, whatever that zeitgeist is, whether it's a general election or a big celebrity scandal or a royal scandal, whatever it is, I instinctively do. But I think because of my newspaper background, I instinctively have a firm opinion about stuff. Now, I can be corrected. I can have people argue really well with me and persuade me I'm wrong. But generally speaking, I'd start from a position I'm right unless somebody proves otherwise.
Okay, just as an intellectual exercise, when was the last time somebody managed to persuade you that you were wrong about something, and what was that? Because I'm struggling to believe you, to be honest.
It has happened, and I have admitted it on air. I can't remember. I think the last time I did admit I was wrong, but I was wrong to admit it. It turned out I was right after all. No, I think it happens occasionally. If you watch the show a lot, you'll know that I don't mind being wrong. I can't offhand think of a specific example, which I know you will find laughable, but no, I mean, I have a kind of, self-righteous self-confidence about opinions. But if you get a real expert who gives me a sort of different perspective on something that I genuinely haven't felt about, I don't mind saying, yeah, you know what, you've changed my mind a bit. And I think it's healthy. We don't have enough of that in any form of life today. Twitter has turned everyone into a member of a tribe. And you have to basically align yourself to everything the tribe says about everything. And I think that's quite dangerous for democracy and just general conversation.
Well, I was a journalist for 10 years on a wholly different scale to yours, much smaller up in Scotland. But the two things that I loved were learning new things and hearing people's stories. And you get to do both of those things still.
I think journalism is about storytelling, really, ultimately, whatever the story may be. And I always felt it's really about people and stories and telling their stories. And you can apply that to any form of life. And to me, if you get a great story, it doesn't matter what it is, people will watch or they'll listen and they'll be interested. But if you don't have stories, you don't have that ability to grab an audience. You've got to grab them with a story.
Well, listen to how slick this is going to be. Let's talk about your story and where it all started for you. See, so you were born in Sussex. Your dad died before your second birthday.
Yeah.
You grew up.
I was born in Surrey, actually. We moved to Sussex later on. Yeah.
Right, and you took your stepfather's surname.
Yeah.
Pugh Morgan. Is that what you said?
Pugh Morgan. He's a Welshman, and took his surname. He took on two young boys, both under 5 at the time. Amazing thing to do in your mid-20s, like he did. So my admiration for my dad's really grown exponentially over the years for what he did, and he came along and picked the pieces up for us.
And you played cricket for England at under-13s level.
I did England prep schools, so not quite England, but the England prep schools squad I was picked for. That was the highlight of my sporting career. But it was great at the time.
Right, it doesn't sound like a bad life, playing cricket every weekend.
It's a lovely life. I had a very, very happy, great childhood. We lived in a pub country pub in East Sussex from the age of, I was about 3 or 4 until I was about 13. And it was a very lively, fun, local village pub. And I just remember loving it. I did the bottling up in the morning, which could be a bit embarrassing because I would go to school at the local village primary, stinking of alcohol, having done the bottling up, and there'd be letters sent to my mother from the head teacher. Your son smells of beer. They'd be like, well, yeah, he was putting a shift in. Yeah. But I loved that feeling. I love pubs now, funny enough. The thing I missed most when I lived in America for a long time, I missed pubs so much.
Because bars are different from pubs.
Bars are not the same, and you know that. And it's there's something about a British pub which is just so unique to us. And my both sets of grandparents on both sides were publicans too. So we had a lot of pubs in the family. And to this day, my absolute great treat is to walk across to my local pub, wherever it may be, and have a pint.
Oh, very nice. And in terms of your childhood then, some kids always know what they want to be. Like they've got it in their head. Were you one of those children? Did you edit your school magazine, all that sort of thing?
I was very lucky. I wanted to be a journalist. My mum says to me, age of 6 or 7, she could remember me reading the Daily Mail voraciously, age 6, which may explain a lot of things. But I loved news, and I loved hearing about things before other people. And that has stayed with me ever since. The one thing, I'm an absolute news junkie. I can't bear to be second to anything. I have to know first whatever's going on.
Never wrong for long, eh?
Well, never ill-informed for wrong. I might be wrong, but I like to be informed about what's happening. I'm addicted to Twitter and stuff because it just breaks news all the time, and I love that.
And in terms of going back there, then did you ever plan out the way in which you were going to get there? Did you ever do the interviewing people in your head in your bedroom? When you were a kid
my mum
thing?
says I used to write to lots of famous people all the time, and I've got so many funny random letters from people. And I used to collect autographs and practice my own from a very early age. So my mother has these sheets of paper just with endless best wishes, Piers Morgan or Piers Pew Morgan, then written all over it, which of course I now have to do. So it's worth the practice.
Oh, you have to do. Let me just bend down and pick that one off the floor.
When I'm mobbed in the street, But it was, I always wanted to be, I think, 2 things. One, a journalist, and secondly, quite early on in my journalism career, on the local Streatham and Tooting News and the Wimbledon News, I began interviewing famous people. Frank Bruno, famously, before he became the British heavyweight champ, Rowan Atkinson, Cliff Richard, people like that. And the paper's editor would give them a big show in the paper, and he would always use a picture of me with the star. And that really made me hanker to be a kind of, I guess, like a celebrity journalist, someone who would be as well known, perhaps, as the people he was writing about. So journalism was my love, but I can't sit here and pretend I didn't also love the limelight, because I did.
I'm looking through the list of your TV shows: Piers Morgan Live, Piers Morgan's Life Stories, President Trump, the Piers Morgan Interview.
There's a theme.
And you seem to like the byline. You've never grown out of that, no?
I think it was when we did President Trump meets Piers Morgan. I think it was my favourite headline of a show.
But I liked when Ronaldo told you had good abs.
Well, that might be the thing I put on my tombstone. Piers, you have good abdominals. From the man with the best abs in world football. That was a good moment.
He's got certainly a very refined musculature, I can certainly say that. One of the things that sounds like it wasn't so idyllic in your childhood is you started off at a kind of private school and then went to a comprehensive. Yeah. Now, I'm not sure if your part of the world was anything like my part of the world, but if somebody called Piers double-barrelled...
Piers Stefan Pew Morgan is my full name.
Rocked up in his cricket whites at my comp.
Yeah.
They might not have been given the best welcome in the world.
I got a few smacks. Yeah. It was a big culture shock, and I think that you either end up with a chip on both shoulders because you've been in both ends and felt bad about it, or like me, you just kind of adapt. I think I've been always very good at adapting to surroundings. I don't care if I'm meeting the Queen or a bin man. To me, everyone's the same. Everybody. And it's an old cliche, but I think I got that from my different types of schooling. I realised there were good and bad people who had great privilege, and there were good and bad people who had nothing. And actually, it just comes down to quality of character. And I found the first few weeks at the comprehensive very tough. I was beaten up by the local skinhead with a multicoloured Mohican and stuff like that. But I had the advantage of a immediate younger brother who was built like a brick outhouse and is now an army colonel, and he took great delight in exacting horrific revenge on said skinhead. So it didn't last
My little
long.
brother is bigger than you.
He was definitely very useful when he arrived. So when Jeremy arrived, he's just got back from Afghanistan. Actually, he's been for a year, but he was able to take care of things, take care of family business, as the Corleones would say.
Right, take care of family business. Alrighty. In terms of leaving school, then you passed up a place at Warwick Uni to go straight to Harlow Tech to kind of get the journalism degree in the bag.
Yeah, I just suddenly thought I don't want to wait another 3-4 years. And you could go on to the National Council of Training and Journalists schools, NCTJ, and they had six centres around the country. And mine was at Harlow Technical College, actually. It was affiliated to the college. That's where they did this course, and it was great. There were 60 of us. From memory, I think there were only 5 men on the course, so it was in many ways it was wonderful, and I had a great time. And it was just it taught me the basics of journalism law, of shorthand, of how local government and senior government worked, all the basics, fundamentals you would need to be a journalist. So it was only a year long, but the thing at the end of it was you were guaranteed a place on a local newspaper, and that was very important to me. So I held out and got a place on Streatham and Tooting News. And there I was in my pinstripe suit with a briefcase, marching down the streets of Tooting. And suddenly it was a whole new world of, serious crime and the Brixton riots fallout and all sorts of stuff. It was very exciting.
And another alumnus from that course is Kelvin Mckenzie, who ended up being your boss. Is that
Yeah,
right?
he was. Yeah. He was my first and only editor, as it turned out. I did 5 years at the Sun under Kelvin. He was, he's built this monstrous reputation. I have to say, he remains probably the most dynamic and extraordinary life force I've ever encountered in newspapers. He would get in at 7 a.m, he'd leave at 11. The Sun was his lair, and he was unbelievably ferocious and fierce, comedic, inspiring, and belittling, and all things. He could be a monster one day and your best friend the next. But overall, he was a brilliant editor for his time of a paper like The Sun, and it was the heartbeat of the working class of this country. And sometimes Kelvin got it wrong, sometimes very badly wrong, with Hillsborough and stuff like that. As an editor of a daily paper for 10 years, I got things wrong, and you're going to make big mistakes, and the question is whether you learn from them and you can make yourself a better editor, I guess. I've got a lot of time for Kelvin. He's a friend of mine. He's someone who's very loyal to me, and of his time, a brilliant editor.
And I've got a feeling that word loyalty is going to come up quite a lot in this interview.
Yeah, because I think if you don't have it, whether it's to friends or family or work colleagues or whatever it may be, if you're basically fundamentally disloyal, you're going to get found out, and you're not going to end up very happy with life. Loyalty to me is important in two ways. Me being loyal to friends and them being loyal back to me. And if they're not really friends.
Well, one of the big gifts he gave you was the bizarre showbiz column. So he'd obviously found this young chap with a bouffant hairdo flapping about Tooting High Street in his pinstripe suit as all these Brixton riots were going on around him, and thought, do you know what? I'm going to set that man up with Madonna. And then look what happened. That must have been... I mean, you go back to that period and you are in every picture. You are in every story. You write about other people.
Funny enough, I interviewed Matt Goss and Bros today, actually. It was just a few days before this is airing. And... we were laughing. It's 32 years since I did a photo shoot. Not with them, but I was interviewing them while they did a photo shoot. And the photographer, a guy called Dave Hogan, big famous Sun photographer, said to me, will you just sit in for the picture so I can get my shot right? So I sat in, and there was a picture of me sitting there with the two Bros twins at the height of their pop stardom, laughing.
And Craig Logan, don't forget.
Well, he'd gone by
he'd gone by that, because he's from Kirkcaldy, he's from where I'm from.
Yeah,
so
Craig
everyone forgets about Craig.
Yeah, I don't forget about Craig.
We have the ownership of Craig in
I get
Scotland.
it. And I knew Craig. He was a very nice lad. But it was just the two twins and me, and we were all laughing. And Kelvin took one look at this set of pictures. In those days, you produced prints of pictures. So how long ago it was. And he'd said, well, that's the one. I love that one. Our man with the pop superstars. And the monster was created. After that, I made sure I was doing every picture. And my dream that I'd had on the local newspapers, that it would fundamentally be about me, came to fruition.
And did your arm recover from having it twisted up your back like that?
Yeah.
One of the things about that time, so you're in your 20s, you're, having breakfast with Bros and tea with, I don't know,
It was
Madonna
the best
and
job
all
in the
that.
world, Ruth.
Oh,
I was being flown around the world. These were the days when newspapers were just swimming in cash. So I would fly first class around the world and I would interview huge stars, whether it was Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sly Stallone or Madonna or Tom Cruise, whoever it was. I was the guy for 5 years at the Sun that would be sent to sit with these mega stars and interview them and do a column on a daily basis. And it was, for a young showbiz reporter, it doesn't get any better. It's very different now, but then it was fantastic.
So the newspapers were swimming with cash, and this is a point that a certain strata of London was swimming in cocaine. Even a fuddy-duddy like Michael Gove could have done it. Did you ever?
My God, you're going for the juggler, aren't you? Look at your body language here. You're going right in. I think I
Look
have
at your
made
body language.
I have made admissions in the past. I had an interesting moment when Naomi Campbell sued the Mirror over pictures of her going into Narcotics Anonymous, and I had to go and give evidence for the first time in the dock. And my QC Desmond Brown said, "Piers, I've got to warn you. They may turn the tables a bit like you're doing now on you, and they may ask you, have you ever taken illegal drugs? And you're going to have to be honest. You're under oath." I went, "Okay, got it." So then I thought, okay, I better come clean. So I then came clean to my sons, to my parents, to my grandmother. I have to say my grandmother found it hugely entertaining to hear my revelations, but I basically conceded, and I'm not going to go into specifics, but I had partaken of the odd substance in my past. And if I was asked, I was going to have to say it, and it would be probably a big story. So I did all this and went through all the fallout of that, and then got into the dock and was there 7 hours, and he never asked me.
The reason I asked you was twofold, actually. One, because Coke specifically makes people louder and talk more, and I kind of want to know what you would be like that. And the second one is this word loyalty is going to come up a lot. The other thing that I've gone through all of your kind of back catalogue of interviews and broadcasts that you've done, and the other word that comes up a lot is hypocrisy, and your justification for publishing intimate details about people's lives when you were a newspaper editor was about hypocrisy, and showing that up was justification alone for showing people another side of
Well, I
famous
don't think it's
people's
as simple
lives.
as that, but certainly if you have clear hypocrisy, but certainly by a politician, if there's no clear hypocrisy, I think it's really hard for a newspaper or any media entity to justify publishing a story. You've got to have some suggestion that they're saying one thing and doing another. Then I think newspapers are perfectly entitled to write about a politician. I remember politicians who were, for example, presiding over policies which were seen to denigrate single mothers, and it turned out one of them, Tim Yeo, I remember, had actually impregnated a woman. And you think, well, that's clear and blatant hypocrisy. So that was always the yardstick for newspapers.
Especially for people who are lawmakers. And I kind of see that in a slightly different way, though, from sheer entertainers. I don't think there's many people who would think that a rock star having a quote-unquote drugs shame is necessarily something that you wouldn't really expect.
But rock stars would admit it. They would tell you because they thought it was
Right.
a badge of honour. So you never had to get out of a rock star that they had, they liked drugs. They thought this was actually good for their brand to admit it. And my thing about celebrities, I think, was it's the old thing about if you're going to sell your wedding for £1 million and then you're going to have an affair or something, I think that that's fair game. If, like people like Rowan Atkinson, you are famously extremely private about your life, I think that in those circumstances you're entitled to more privacy. But I think there is a balancing act between how much you're putting out there for financial gain about your life, and you're right then to expect privacy in return.
Well, you famously have been friends with Boris Johnson for 25 years and President Trump for 10. Would you call either of them a hypocrite in any of the public pronouncements they've made and
Boris not
the issues
particularly.
of their private lives?
Yeah, Boris not particularly, because I don't think he hasn't moralised about things. He's led a fairly lively life, but I wouldn't say that he's been a massive moraliser. And I think that that's what he always points to. He says, look, I'm not a moraliser about these things. I interviewed him for GQ back in 2008 and asked him about that. He said he would never sack anybody, for example, for sexual misconduct. And I'm sure that's true. And the reason he says that is because of probably his own background. So I think that, and in Trump's case, I would say similar. He's not a great moralizer about personal behaviour. I can't remember him doing it. So I think it is a question of what you put out there. If you're going to be the great moralisers, or you're going to be someone presiding over policies which affect a certain whether it's, say it's drug abuse, say you're a Home Secretary and you want to get clamped down on drug abusers, and it turns out you have a secret cocaine habit, there's clear hypocrisy.
Or your son is caught with them, for example.
Right, then there's blatant hypocrisy, isn't there?
Okay. Well, talking about sackings, famously sacked from editing the Mirror newspaper, not for publishing fake pictures, but for not apologising for publishing fake pictures.
Well, I've never accepted they were fake. I mean, let's put that on the table. We were told they were fake by the government, which lied over WMD, and by this regiment, which has since been discredited by some of their soldiers being court-martialed and whatever. So
also showed certainly evidence that one of the vehicles that was supposed to be in Abu Ghraib, that was in one of the pictures, had never left a garage of a TA centre in the UK.
So they said. Yeah, so they said. What we do know.
So we don't trust anything anyone says. That's
listen,
deep in conspiracy theory territory now.
I got fired, but I didn't believe half of the stuff that was being said about the circumstances behind my departure. I've never accepted necessarily those pictures were faked. They were brought to us by two soldiers in the Queen's Lancashire Regiment who stood by them after the balloon went up on all the controversy. But more importantly, various soldiers from that regiment were later court-martialed, and their own commanding officer went public and said his men had behaved like a pack of wild animals. And we know the case of Baha Musa, the hotel receptionist in Iraq, who was tortured and murdered over a 3-day period by soldiers from that regiment. So I make no apology for exposing bad apples, and I say that as someone whose own family is steeped with army officers. And my brother is a current army colonel. I sat with the previous head of the British Army, General Nick Carter, on a trip to the northern French battlefields 2 or 3 years ago. And we sat down on the park bench overlooking the Battle of Arras scene, and we got talking about various things, including my departure. And he said, you should not feel bad about the story that you published. It was right to be published. And he said, you can say that on the record from me. So
is there a statute of limitations on wrongful dismissal, Piers?
I don't think I was wrongfully dismissed. I think the Mirror were perfectly entitled to do what they did. But I've never accepted those pictures were necessarily fake. I've never seen concrete evidence to my satisfaction. And more importantly, we gave these pictures to the Ministry of Defence at midday, the day before publication. They never came back with any suggestion that they may be in any way not accurate. That speaks volumes to me. The Chief of General Staff at the time, General Mike Jackson, went on national television 9 hours after we gave them to them and said these men are not fit to wear the British Army shirt. People can draw their own conclusions about what went on. Maybe we were set up. I've always thought that might be a possibility. But I don't necessarily accept they were fake, and they certainly depicted a wider truth about what some elements of that regiment were doing, and it was bad stuff. And this whole debate about what soldiers can and can't do in battle is an important one to have. If you represent your country, we have to surely, in my opinion, abide by the right kind of standards, especially if we're going to go to war with places where we think they don't have those standards.
So the question now about what's happening in terms of prosecutions in Northern Ireland, where do you stand on that?
Well, I think it's very complex when you're going back that far. I mean, you've got to remember at the time that we did this, it was just 2 weeks after Abu Ghraib had blown up in America, with those horrendous images of the torture that was going on from some American troops towards Iraqi civilians. But this was all happening in real time. I think it's incredibly hard to litigate these allegations back in Northern Ireland from 40 years ago. It's just almost impossible to do. And it then becomes a bit of a witch hunt where it's almost impossible for those who are accused to present any kind of evidence to defend themselves. It's very hard. So whilst I completely understand the anger that it causes in Northern Ireland, I also understand the frustration and anger it causes with those who are accused of committing crimes at the time, when so much time has passed they can't prove either way.
Well, if we're talking about the space that distance creates, clearly you have spoken a lot about your dismissal over time, but that was a long time ago now. What did it feel like at the time? I mean, does somebody as bulletproof as you go home and have a moment of self-reflection?
Actually, no, I was fine about it. I know it sounds weird, but my friends will all tell you, I gathered at my flat. I had a flat overlooking the river, and I gathered at my flat with 3 or 4 of my best friends, and we ordered a load of wine and Chinese, and we watched my obituaries on national TV, and we were all finding it quite funny, actually. And I'd been there 10 years. I remember getting a few calls in the car on the way back from the office, having been literally thrown into the street. And they tried to take my car away. And I said, I just bought that last month off the company, which I had. So it was my car. So I was able to drive myself back. And then the phone began going. The first one was Ian Botham. Sir Ian, do you want to come to my place in Spain? Just get away. If you want to do it, incredibly kind offer. Marco Pierre White, the chef, rang and said, let's go and get wrecked. You don't have to worry about your phone going off anymore or doing work. We can have a long lunch, which we did. And then Mohammed Al Fayed rang me, who he owned Harrods at the time, and said, I'm looking for a new doorman. Would you like to start Monday? So that all made me laugh. And then my friends made me laugh. And the very next day, Arsenal were playing Leicester at home. And we had to avoid losing to become invincible for the first time in the history of the Premier League. And we went 1-0 down at half-time, and my phone blew up with people going, when it rains, it pours. And we turned it round, we won 2-1, and we were invincible. So oddly, all the Sunday papers, expecting pictures of me lying face down in the gutter somewhere, actually had me coming out of Highbury Stadium clutching a replica of the Premier League, chanting invincible, which was, I agree, ironic, but it was good.
Do you know, it's funny because what I was kind of trying to get at was whether you had a quiet moment in the house, told your wife, don't worry, darling, it's going to be okay, we're still going to pay the mortgage, or anything like that. You know, just a chink of something behind this absolute impervious.
Well, I wasn't with my wife then.
Right, okay.
So we'd separated a few years before. So no, I had none of that.
I'll still pay the alimony, do you know, any of that.
No,
the child support will be there.
No, because actually I'd written a few chapters for a book. And I knew it was my diaries, and I knew I couldn't publish it while I was still editing the paper. So I rang my literary agent and went, good news, we can do the book. And she went, great, why? I went, I just got fired. And I did the book, and it was a #1 bestseller, and I got a nice payoff. So actually, I ended that summer feeling completely refreshed. I'd done a great book deal. I got a good severance deal from the Mirror, which I think was right after 10 years. I had my best batting average playing for the Village League cricket team I'd ever had, and have ever had since. And I thought, great, you know, I did 10 years is long enough for any job, whether you're a prime minister or a newspaper editor, whatever it may be. I think 10 years, bang, out, because by then your ideas get repetitive. So I was ready to go.
Have you ever heard the phrase failing up?
Yes, I think I'm a living embodiment of it.
Well, the other big controversy during your time as editor, which came out later, was phone hacking. Now, you have made plenty of statements about what you knew, what you didn't know, what prosecutions did or didn't occur at your titles, you know, all of that sort of thing. But what I've never heard you say is a value judgment on it. Did you think it was wrong at the time? Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, there's no defence for phone hacking. I think this new technology came in and journalists were stretching the boundaries, and a very small number of journalists were doing this on various papers, and it was wrong. There's no defence for it. I've never tried to make any defence for it. All I've been able to say is, look, I never hacked a phone, wouldn't have known how to do it. I never told anybody to hack a phone. Not a single one of the 1,000-odd journalists that I employed at the Daily Mirror has ever been charged or convicted of any offence connected to phone hacking. So people can think what they like, frankly, about me and phone hacking, but my position's been consistent, and that is my position.
Yeah, see, you pick your words really carefully as
Not
an
really.
ex-journalist.
That's pretty unequivocal.
Well, I didn't hack a phone. I didn't instruct someone to hack a phone. None of my people were charged with hacking a phone. When you gave your evidence to the inquiry, the quote was, to the best of my recollection, I do not believe so. None of that is a no. None of that is...
Well, how can I be certain that none of 1,000 people ever hacked a phone? Of course I can't.
But
you can't say
instructing someone is not the same as knowing and turning a blind eye to something.
No, it is actually. Yeah, it is. I thought it was wrong. So, you know, I know people want to assume that I must have known more than I did. That's fine, but you're just going to have to either accept my word or never accept it. It doesn't really bother me either way. But the facts are the facts. Not a single journalist that ever worked for me at the Daily Mirror has ever been charged with any offence. That says it all, as far as I'm concerned.
So where did some of the stories that were in your paper then come from when there are people who are the subject of the stories are saying, we can't think of how it could have come from anything other than the voicemail messages that were on my phone?
150 stories a day for 10 years. I produced 3,500 newspapers. I had at any one time 400 or 500 journalists in the room. This idea that editors know every single thing that's going on is fanciful. It's like saying a prime minister knows what's going on with all his cabinet. Do they? Of course they don't. So I think there's a lot of fanciful nonsense spoken about this. If you're asking me, do I think phone hacking was wrong? Absolutely, it was wrong. Was that anything to do with it? No.
How did it feel then when Lord Justice Leveson said that your answers were utterly unpersuasive?
He said one part of my testimony he found unpersuasive. I found a lot of what he said unpersuasive. I felt he was fighting a completely wrong battle with old school media when the real battle is the Wild West of the internet and social media, which he barely addressed. It's what is going on now that should be exercising, in my opinion, people's minds more keenly. The internet is wild, and it's doing stuff that we would never have dreamed doing in newspapers, and yet that was completely ignored.
Well, I think actually we can get onto the internet, because there's a really early interview. I think it's your first interview you did where you were first made an editor at the News of the World, which at that time was the most read Western newspaper anywhere in the world. And it was about 5 million people read it. Your Twitter feed has 6.9 million followers, and you don't have to run a newsroom. You don't have to keep a publisher happy. You don't have to make sure you keep advertisers on side. You don't have to obey the rules of, like you say, this really unregulated space. Surely you must be in clover. You get to have all the rants that you like, and the world sees it.
But I never get sued because I know where the line is, because I spent 10 years running a newspaper where every day you're facing this challenge of what is lawful and not, and what is permissible and not, and what is ethical and so on. So I don't get into the same trouble lots of other people do. What I don't like, and we had this debate with one of the victims of this on Good Morning Britain very recently, was the cave dive hero in Thailand who helped rescue these kids, who Elon Musk, the tech billionaire, called a pedo on Twitter. And understandably, I mean, it's no worse thing to call somebody when they're not. And he sued and he lost. Elon Musk won. He won the right to basically call someone he didn't know, who'd only been well known to the public because he saved kids from drowning in a cave. He was able to call him a paedophile, and that was deemed lawful and legitimate. Almost like a license now for anyone to call anybody whatever they want on the internet. I thought that was a horrendous decision.
Well, you went live on air and called Ewan McGregor a paedophile-loving hypocrite.
Yeah,
and
he is.
You got away with it.
Well, he is. But that's factually true.
You've got the Veritas excuse, have you?
Simple excuse. He worked for Roman Polanski and talked about how much he loved him and how much he loved working for him. Roman Polanski is a fugitive child rapist. He's a fugitive paedophile. So the idea that statement is not accurate is absurd. The difference with Elon Musk is the guy he targeted is not a paedophile. Even Elon Musk admitted he didn't think he was really a paedophile. He just put it on the internet. That's the difference.
Well, is the difference then not...
The difference is the truth.
Well, the difference is the truth, but there is also the difference between newspapers and being a newspaper editor in this country and, taking your phone out after you've had a night on the sherries or the sherbets or anything you like, is that you don't necessarily get sued in this country. So you've got to know where the line is in all countries.
Absolutely.
Because there's going to, I'm sure, going to be a healthy dose of litigation tourism.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I have a strict don't drink and tweet rule. I think it's very dangerous, alcohol with Twitter. You can literally end your career with one tweet these days.
And people have.
And people have quite regularly. This cancel culture we now live in, people will look for any opportunity to get you cancelled. And I think if you're remotely well known, alcohol and Twitter and your phone is not a good mix.
Well, before we move on to the television, just one more question about the newspapers. Is it true that your grandma told you to leave Princess Diana alone?
My mother probably did. My mother was a massive royalist, and she camped on the Mall for Charles and Diana's wedding. She camped on the Mall for Andrew and Fergie's wedding, and loves the royal family. And she would quite regularly say, please go a bit easier on Diana. However, I would then explain to my mother that it was Diana that probably had given me the story. So Diana was a complex character. She would ring me up and give me stories about herself. And often the public wouldn't know that or not even want to know that. But she did that with quite a few journalists.
How do you get to that situation where she's got your mobile phone, where you know her well?
She invited me for lunch at the Kensington Palace with her and Prince William, and we had a 2-3 hour lunch. Paul Burrell was the butler serving it, I remember, and she was incredibly open. William was 13, and she spilled her heart out about all sorts of stuff. And after that, we had quite a lot of contact, and she would ring up, and I would ring her, and she would come on the phone, and we'd talk about how to do stories, how not to do stories. I would do her the odd favour. And in return, she might give us something. She very much worked with the media. And I was only one of a few journalists and editors that she did this with. So Diana was in many ways, she was the most hunted person by the media, but she was also one of the most manipulative people I've encountered using the media. So she was able to, I think, be both a victim and someone that used the media at the same time.
It sounds like someone that is drawn to and repelled by.
Yes.
A very strong light all at the same time.
Yeah, she would come out. She took me to the window. She said, look at all these cars, News of the World, National Enquirer, whatever. And then she said, I have to go past them every day. I said, you've got 10 ways of getting out of this palace. Why do you always go past them? She said, well, why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't I? It's like this defiance. And I understood that defiance. And she was a police-trained driver. She could take them. She used to give them the runaround all around London when she was bored. But it was a kind of moth to light. She couldn't resist basically getting into a chase with them sometimes.
So if she was, it sounds like she was a friend.
I wouldn't say a friend,
right.
But we got to know each other quite well. And I think she appreciated in the last 2 or 3 years of her life that we'd had a much more considered relationship with her. For instance, I stopped using any paparazzi pictures of her where it was clear the paparazzi had deliberately wound her up to get an image of her looking angry or distressed, which was going on. And she made me watch a video she'd been sent of a pack of paparazzi, not the regular ones. These were like just wild paparazzi who just picked up cameras and began chasing her. And they were literally hunting her like a pack. I was really quite alarmed when I saw the video. And I said to her, we're not going to take any more of these pictures. You have my word. We put it in the paper. And so very tragically, she was then killed in a car chase with a lot of paparazzi in Paris. And I felt unbelievably sad for her. But the Mirror, under my editorship, had banned paparazzi pictures of that kind appearing in the paper.
You did break the James Hewitt affair story, though, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you don't see any conflict?
With the James Hewitt story?
Yeah.
God, no. He has sold Diana down the river for, I don't know, how long? 30 years? I mean, please. The idea that James Hewitt has not tried to make as much as he can out of that relationship for personal financial gain.
It's not him I'm questioning, Piers.
Oh, you mean Diana?
I mean you.
What, me? What do you mean?
Standing on the morals of the Mirror for not doing this part and not taking these pictures at this time.
Yeah, but surely you can be all... I'm not claiming to be Mother Teresa, but I am claiming that it was ironic to me that Diana died in the way that she did, and the papers all got the blame, when in fact the Mirror, you can go back and check it, we had banned paparazzi pictures where she looked even remotely distressed. Now, it's a small thing, but it was important to her. And it showed, I think, that we were beginning to realise that the hunt was getting quite dangerous. More and more unlicensed paparazzi were running around with cameras, and it was getting dangerous for her. And I totally accepted that and understood it.
Well, let's move on to your television career, which that seems to have sprung from a phone call to Simon Cowell, or have I got?
Well, he rang me actually, yeah.
Right.
He said, "Can I come to lunch?" He said, "I'm thinking you're bringing about a talent show." He said, 3 judges, 3 buzzers, any talent. Like the old Gong Show, Opportunity Knocks, that kind of thing. And he said, would you be interested? I went, yeah, I'd love to.
So 4 years on Britain's Got Talent, 6 years on America's Got Talent. Did anyone ask you what your talent was?
Very often.
Right, okay. And what would you answer?
Journalism and talent spotting.
Right.
So my job as an editor was to spot talent often. And I helped take that, for example. Will tell you that I knew them before they were famous, thought they had something, got behind them in the paper massively, and they became one of the biggest pop bands of all time. So I felt I was a good talent spotter in that sense, even though I had limited musical experience. Although I can play the piano to a reasonable level. I can sing a bit like Axl Rose when I've had a bottle of Jack Daniels. And
we've got microphones. We're sitting in a radio studio.
I sing quite a lot on Good Morning Britain. It's not a pretty sight, but it's what I lack in technical expertise, I make up for with enthusiasm. But it was no, I loved it. But yeah, people would say, "What's your talent?" Well, that's not the point. The point is, what is your talent? I've now seen 1,000 singers, 1,000 jugglers. You can very quickly work out who's good and who isn't.
Okay, so that's the kind of light, fluffy side of politics. It's good, wholesome family Saturday night viewing. But you've done a lot of stuff that's not. So you've got The Dark Side of Fame with Piers Morgan, Killer Women with Piers Morgan, Confessions of a Serial Killer with Piers Morgan, Psychopath with Piers Morgan. If I was in the style of Mrs. Merton, I would ask you, what has attracted the prenatally driven Piers Morgan to surround himself with such remorseless sociopaths?
When you work with Simon Cowell, psychopaths are easy, trust me.
You do know that's how we're promoting this programme
Of
now,
course,
don't you?
of course.
Okay.
No,
we can all read a headline.
Someone did a psychopath test on me for Radio Times, some expert in psychopaths, and he deduced I was a good psychopath, so I wasn't a bad one. I didn't quite know what that meant, but I took it as a bit of a relief. No, I am drawn to I would say the good in life and the dark side of life. I think most people find crime utterly fascinating. I go and sit down with serial killers and psychopaths, and I find them fascinating interviews to do. In the same way that many celebrities, especially the big stars, are often fascinating. Fascinatingly good or fascinatingly awful. What makes people tick ultimately is what I'm really interested in. Whether I do my life story show or sitting with a criminal, really it's about who is this person and what makes them tick.
It comes back to what you said before about being a journalist treating everybody the same, whether they're a cabinet minister or a convict, and have one at breakfast, question another at lunchtime, and you can't tell the difference between.
And I take people as I find them. Always have done. I never care what other people have said about somebody before I meet them or talk to them or interview them. It doesn't bother me. I literally will. It's a clean book for me. It's like, let me find out whether I like you or not. I like lots of disagreeable people. Lots of people like me, for the wrong reasons perhaps, or the right reasons. But ultimately, I judge people how I find them.
It's funny. You judge public people as well as private people that you've met. I found this interview that you did at the Oxford Union for your son's pal, where you admitted that after the 2015 election, you voted for the Animal Welfare Party because you couldn't stand any of the leaders of any of the mainstream ones, and the quote was, "a stain on all your ghastly houses."
Yeah.
So can I ask how you voted in 2019?
Yes, you can. I voted for Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party. Not from any great love of either, but because, as I made clear on Good Morning Britain for the last 3 years, I was incensed by the failure to honour the result of the referendum, in which I voted to remain, and I would vote to remain again. I'm not a great fan of Brexit. However, I'm a much bigger fan of democracy. And to me, Boris Johnson was the only major party candidate who was offering to honour democracy and to respect the fact 17.4 million people had voted to leave the European Union. And here we were 3.5 years later, after a concerted effort by Remainers / Remoaners, led by former prime ministers, led by a three-quarters dominant Remain parliament, led by all sorts of factions. And their sole mission was to try and stop the fabled will of the people being respected. And when I went to my ballot box, I was crystal clear, and I'm often not, actually. I've voted for Conservatives and Labour over the years, and the Animal Welfare Party. But on this occasion, I was quite clear. I was going to vote for the only candidate outside of the Brexit Party, which was a niche and, to my view, fairly irrelevant part of the election. I was going to vote for the candidate who promised to deliver on the way that people had voted in 2015. So to me, it was, a clear-cut case of democracy being more important than actually any individual person or party.
Do you understand why people might find it odd that you looked at sort of general professional kind of centrists, managerial types like David Cameron and Ed Miliband and went, I'm voting for the Animal Welfare Party, but they looked at this election campaign with Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson for all their stated flaws that the other side points out about each other and went, actually, I can make a clear decision on this one.
Well, I thought that Corbyn was more principled than Ed Miliband.
And he's an Arsenal fan.
I didn't agree with most of what Corbyn stood for, but he's more principled, I think, than Ed Miliband. David Cameron, I just couldn't bring myself to vote for him because I didn't feel anything about him. Whereas Boris Johnson has got something about him. He's a very charismatic guy. I've known him a long time. I like him personally. He's got his flaws, but most great leaders have flaws. And what Boris quickly worked out in this election was that the simple mantra of get Brexit done was going to win. And the fact he got so many working class Labour voters from the north to go to a ballot box and put their cross in for him was astonishing, but didn't surprise me. I used to edit the Daily Mirror. These were my readers that were walking to vote for a posh boy from Eton. And you would never have imagined that could happen. But it happened because, like me, they wanted democracy to be seen to be prevalent and to succeed in that election. And that's what had been ignored by our parliament and by our leaders for the last 3 years.
Well, one of the things you argued at is calling an election. You were one of the first to say that Trump was going to win. You've also said that you would never vote for him because you completely disagree on things like abortion and climate change.
I disagree with him on certain things. Probably don't agree with him on enough stuff to vote for him, and I can't anyway. But I did call it before because, again, rather like with, I think, Boris, the elites, perhaps, in Trump's case, and he's an elite in his own way. Of course he is. He's a billionaire real estate tycoon. But he understood that middle America is very different to the two coasts. And if you go live in California, as I've done on and off for 10 years, or New York, same, I've been there a lot too, it's liberal central. And they have no understanding about middle America, and they care even less. To them, Hillary Clinton was obviously going to get elected. She was not only a woman, but she was the most brilliantly gifted candidate they'd ever had. And she lost to someone who'd never been a politician, who was a real estate tycoon. But I called it quite early because I knew Trump, and I knew that middle America was going to like him. And they were going to see him as a billionaire Pied Piper going up against the establishment.
Like you say, you've talked about what you disagree with them on, but also that you're very close friends. And do you bemoan the fact that we are seeing less and less of people being able to be friends with people they disagree with?
Yeah, I think it's
particularly in the digital space.
Yes, I think it's ridiculous, particularly as I keep saying I wouldn't vote for Trump. It's like you are allowed to be friends with people whose opinions you completely disagree with. I have people in my family far more right-wing than Trump. He's not even that right-wing, Trump. If you actually get away from the constant inflammatory rhetoric and tweeting, which is, by the way, atypical of every real estate tycoon I've ever met in New York. He's no different to the rest of them. He's like most New Yorkers. If you get away from all that inflammatory, hyperbolic nonsense, and you cut to what Trump's actually done, he's not even that right-wing or that conservative. The conservative Christian right wing in middle America find him quite difficult to deal with because they don't agree with a lot of his pronouncements about stuff. He's the first Republican president to ever reference LGBT at the lectern on his inauguration day. That's not an insignificant thing. Now,
But neither is the rhetoric, because you've just put that to one side. But some of his rhetoric on things like immigration, surely you can't put to one side. You can't just say, oh, it's just words, because those words do mean
Well, I've written
something.
about 80 columns on Trump for the dailymail.com in America, and the majority just have been critical, and the rest have been supportive. And I think that's a more accurate, balanced picture if you get out of the tribes about Trump as president. He's got the economy.
But he has led to families being separated.
Sure, but let me take that up with you. So that was wrong, and I wrote a column about it. It was a policy that lasted about a week. He realised it was wrong. He reversed it. Should never have happened. It was a slightly more extreme policy to the one Obama had operated. Obama deported 3 million illegal immigrants from America in 8 years. He was known as deporter-in-chief in Mexico. It was the highest number of deportations in the history of the United States. I don't hear any liberals ever mention it. They don't even know. There'll be people listening to this now go, what? 3 million? He way outdid Trump in terms of deportations. So I can't stomach the double standards about this. Similarly...
Coming back to that word of hypocrisy again.
Well, yeah, and again with Obama, Saint Barack, he dropped the most number of bombs in 1 year by any American president. He did more drone strikes than anybody. He kept Guantanamo Bay, an illegal torture chamber, open, having campaigned in 2008-09 to shut it down. He kept it open throughout his tenure. He did nothing about gun control, despite constantly saying it was a priority, and so on. A lot of frustrations with Obama. I never thought he was that good as a president, actually. Talked a great game, looked a great game, did all the right things and said all the right things, and the liberals loved him, but actually he didn't get much done. Trump, whether you like him or not, is honouring a lot of his commitments that he made when he ran as president. And on the economy, certainly been pretty successful. On his foreign policy, I'd be interested in what you think of this, but I find his foreign policy both interesting and broadly so far accentuated by a desire for peace, not war. Why is that a bad thing? Why is it wrong that he wants to forge peace, not war, which has been the American war machine's view for the last 60 years?
I've just lost a bet because we wondered how long it would take before you started asking me questions. So
My apologies.
I thought it would be much earlier. But one of the things, so you're quite friends with him. What I'm interested in, how do you communicate? Does he slide into your DMs on Twitter when he's on? Do you have a little early morning chat?
He used to
when
ring
you're
me
up
all
in
the time.
makeup?
We used to ring each other all the time, and I've interviewed him maybe 40 times, but he now you go through his press office or whatever, and I'll put if I want to speak to him, which I do very occasionally, I'll ask and he'll call, and if he calls me, I'll take the call. Obviously, he's the president of the United States.
Tell us what the last phone call was. Tell us what it was about, at least.
Well, the last time I saw him was in July when he came for the first state visit. Or June, I think it was, and I interviewed him in the Churchill War Rooms. And you talk about loyalty. Trump's a very loyal guy. If you're loyal to him, I've done the only 3 interviews with him as president that anyone on British television's done, and he's given them all to me. And that's just loyalty, because I did his show and we stayed in touch, and over the years he thinks I've been fair to him.
And nobody's shown him the critical columns because he doesn't take criticism.
Well, I'm one of the only 45 people he follows on Twitter, of which half are his family or their companies. So I'm literally, there's about 30 human beings he follows. I'm the only British person he follows. So he, on his Twitter feed, sees my critical columns. I pump them through Twitter, but I always do it in a respectful tone. I never just abuse him. And I think it's the abuse that sends him off the dial. I'll give you an example. Emmanuel Macron, and he couldn't be more different in terms of policy, and yet Macron, I think, plays Trump quite well. He's respectful to him, and then he'll criticise him quite openly, but he's always does it from a position of respect in the office of president. I think that's fair enough, and I think Trump finds that fair enough. He just finds being called a moron or whatever, which is, by the way, the language he often uses himself. I get that. But if you disrespect him, he goes into war mode. And then it all just flies off.
And because you know this about him, because you know there's this wrath there, because you understand that you've got to flatter, does that make you an easy interviewer?
I don't think so. Funny enough, a lot of American journalists after the last one said they find my interviews with him the most interesting, because I do push him on. I always try and find 3 or 4 things I can push him hard on. So last time, for example, it was his decision to ban transgender servicemen and women from the military, which I thought was completely outrageous and completely wrong. And I presented to him a fact that it costs more money to supply servicemen and women in America with Viagra than it ever would to cover all the medical costs for all transgender troops. So, he didn't have a legitimate answer for that. Gun control, I've gone after him hard on, and actually got him to change a policy about banning bumpfire stock after the Vegas massacre. So I think I do have an effect on him. Elephant trophy hunting was another one where he changed the policy and he retweeted me to say what he was doing. I like to think that I can be, like all friends, a critical friend when it's important, but I'm not going to join the Trump hysteria, the anti-Trump hysteria, because I think it's not accurate. I think some of what he does is good and should be lauded. And secondly, all it does is embolden him more. All it does is make him more popular. This impeachment process right now, everybody knows how this ends. It ends with the Senate acquitting him. So Trump in election year gets a big win and can say, I told you, fake news, I've been acquitted, and I suspect it will lead to him being re-elected quite comfortably in November next year.
Just before we head, you have this love of the States. You've lived over there for a long time. Is your family still over there in New York?
I've got a house in LA, which I go to quite a lot, yeah.
Okay, so how do you manage to split your time between family being on one side of the ocean, you being on the other, and all that sort of thing?
We go together now because my daughter's at school here in London, so we just go in the holidays really, and I get quite a lot of time off the morning show, which is good for me and the country, I think.
And this is, so you've got 3 sons by your first wife and a daughter by your second.
Yeah.
Is there a difference to being the father of a daughter or being an older dad? Or?
Oh, definitely. I know you've just become a parent.
Well, I'm actually quite interested. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you got a boy, right?
Yeah. Well, exactly. Mothers and sons, fathers and daughters.
Yeah.
That sort
well,
of
boys are easier because they're like dogs. If you with my 3. If you could throw them outside to play football for 2 hours, they'd be the sweetest kids imaginable. If they were cooped up inside because the weather was terrible or you couldn't let them go outside, they would become a total uncontrollable nightmare. Girls are different. My daughter has me completely wrapped around her finger, highly manipulative, can get stuff out of me the boys could never get out of me. And do you love it? I love it.
Yeah.
I can't deny it. There's something about when she comes back from school and she does her little flashy grin. In that moment, I would give her anything she wants. I never felt that with the boys. They know it. I had to be tougher with them.
Are you a good man?
I don't think I'm a bad man. I think I've had moments that I would regret over my life and career, like most people. I think I've been pretty honest about them when they've happened. I try and do the right thing. I try and do what my gut tells me is the right thing. And occasionally, I think, like most of us, I may, to quote Top Gun, fall below the hard deck. And I've had great highs and great lows, personally and professionally. And I think you take all of those things and you end up at 54 and you look back and you go, well, it's been a life well lived. It hasn't been a life perfectly lived. It's been a life with blemishes, but it's been a life I've thoroughly enjoyed.
Piers Morgan, thank you very much.
And there's plenty more to come, Ruth Davidson.
I don't doubt that.